If you've landed on this video, well, first of all, welcome, but second of all, you're probably trying to make a tough decision about which prime lens is right for you, which you'll enjoy the most, and which you'll get the most use out of. My first tip is, if you have a zoom lens that you primarily shoot with, look at the metadata and see where most of your shots land in terms of focal length. I'd also recommend renting the lens that you're thinking about to get a real feel of whether or not you'll like shooting with it. That's what I did with a 35mm prime from Sony, and as I explained in the video linked above and below, it was a no-brainer for me to purchase not too long after that. Today, we're gonna use the 35mm prime as the base for comparison between that and the 20mm and 85mm focal lengths. One, because 35 is my favorite prime focal length and part 2 of a series I have around it. 2, because it's one half of the popular 35 and 85 prime combo that lots of people like to use to cover weddings or events. They pair quite well and both have a case for being the first prime you buy. And 3, because 20mm is another prime that's grown in popularity and gives more of a unique field of view than the 24, in my opinion. Plus, you don't often see the 20 and 35 compared against each other, so I hope this helps you if that's a decision you're making in this video. If you haven't seen my take on why I love the 35mm prime in general first, I'd say maybe check that one out before this one, but let's get started. Comparing the 35 to the 85, obviously these are very different focal lengths with very different strengths and weaknesses, and there's an argument to be made for both being a solid complement to your standard 24-70 if that's all you have in your kit right now. The 35 is what I've said is easiest to replace your 24-70 with if you're looking for something to walk around with that's a little bit lighter and smaller, and obviously it's brighter as well for more low light capability. That's especially helpful when traveling. The 85, on the other hand, is also lighter than a lot of 24-70s, but by no means would I consider it close to a one-to-one substitute that could be used in place of a 24-70 to get anything close to similar results. With a 35, you can take a step or two back for wider shots or a step or two closer for tighter portraits or details. You're basically using your feet to zoom. But with the 85, you feel much more locked into one type of shot unless you're so far away from your subject that the 85 actually gives you enough room to fit everything in, like capturing the city of Florence from across the river. Most of the time though, you'll find yourself needing to step further back from your subject, a lot further than you would with the 35. When traveling or trying to shoot casually, that is not always easy. You do get a unique image though, like these taken with my wife in Florence, but it took some crafting and asking a few people to step out of the frame for some quick snaps. I also had the 85 out and about in Rome a while back and was trying everything I could to get a wide shot of the Victory Manual II monument, and I had to move multiple blocks back to get the angle I needed. Like, I kept moving further away and it just never seemed like it was quite far enough. That's actually the reason that, like a total camera snob, I brought 3 full-frame lenses with me on the trip to Europe and found myself bringing the 35 or 20 along with the 85 anytime I took the 85 out, because sometimes it just wasn't a usable lens if we were in anything close to tight quarters. On the other hand, anytime I brought just the 35mm, I found that it was all I needed, and I really wasn't missing much. Now don't get me wrong, the 85 offers truly unique looking images, and even someone who doesn't know what they're looking at can clearly tell that the pictures are a cut above what would be captured with a phone or a simple point and shoot because of the background compression that the 85 helps deliver when you stand the right distance away from your subject. But there were also times where the 35mm in the right setting delivered similar, very pleasing results. These were taken on the side of a mountain in Switzerland. The 35 is on the left and the 85 on the right. And they both work here because there was plenty of room to work with. Depending on how far you're standing away from your subject, you can get a similar looking compression of the image with the mountain or whatever your background is. Another quick example, 2 different hikes here in the Pacific Northwest. Took just the 85 on this one because I wanted to go for different looks. Instead, it was honestly kind of frustrating, especially when trying to fit the environment and waterfalls into the frame. Straight up, I just should have known better. Didn't repeat that mistake though, because a few weeks later in Hood River, I did a different hike with my wife and sister and took only the 35, and it was much more usable. I got portraits that I liked while also fitting in the landscapes just fine. And I guess my point here is versatility. The 35 can go from wide-ish to portrait. The 85, unless you have ample space, doesn't really allow that. Though I will say my absolute favorite part about the 85mm is being able to get full body shots that make the subject really pop when shooting from a distance at apertures close to wide open. That's when you can go to f1.4 or f2 and keep your subject completely in focus because you're standing far enough away, and get some really cool images, again, where the subject pops because of that low aperture. So again, you trade off versatility for the unique background separation, and if that's something you want in your arsenal that you don't currently get with any of your lenses, well, maybe the 85 is the way to go right off the bat. Hope all that made sense. And if it did, or you like the way I break some of these things down, or have any questions, ask away in the comments, and if you don't mind, drop this video a like, maybe subscribe to the channel too. Okay, back to business. Let's compare the 35mm to the 20. They're closer in range than the 35 and 85, but still very, very different. What I do like about the 20mm focal length, and specifically Sony's 20mm f1.8G lens, is how small it is. For a full-frame lens, it's one of the least conspicuous that you'll find outside of any pancake lenses. I also find that the 20mm is probably about as wide as I'm comfortable shooting most of the time. I love the idea of owning a 16-35 one day maybe, but even 20mm is pushing it for my personal taste sometimes, and I'd rather have the f1.8 aperture than the 2.8 of your typical 16-35 zoom. Anyway, how does 20 differ from 35? Well, with the 20 and anything you'll find wider than that, if your subject is near the camera, your background is going to be pushed away from the subject quite a bit more. That's also why it's not always the most flattering for faces. If you're too close, your nose will probably come across bigger than you'd like it to, while the rest of your face is pushed back a little. You also have to be more aware of your surroundings and maybe okay with capturing things in your frame that you didn't want to. Especially when traveling, if there are lots of people around, they'll probably end up in the shot. Like this one at a fountain in Florence. I asked my wife to capture the tower behind us along with myself, but that meant a few people sitting on the steps make the cut too. But on the other hand, when we walked down the street later, she was standing just maybe a few feet from me on the sidewalk and was able to capture a pretty cool full body shot. So it can be pretty useful in tight quarters. Now, Sony's 20mm is the only version of this focal length that I've used, but it has a really close minimum focus distance, and that makes it a great lunch table or dinner table lens if you're into taking pics of your meal or whatever's on the table in front of you. Going back to my point earlier about pushing the background away from the subject, photos of food, drink, plants, things, objects, that is where this feature of a wide-angle lens really shines. I really love pairing this lens with a full-frame camera body that has a high megapixel count and or an APS-C mode. I use it with the 33 megapixel a7 IV, which leaves plenty of room for cropping and post if I need to, and in APS-C mode, I can still get a 14 megapixel image with the equivalent to a 30mm focal length. All of that makes it a considerable competitor to the 35mm for an everyday walk-around lens if you're willing to get creative with your shots of people and understand its limitations for anything that is close to a portrait. Because of how unique this 20mm lens is on the wide end and with the ability to crop in, it's more attractive to me than something like the popular 24mm focal length. But it does take practice. It's a lens that I had to force myself to appreciate and force myself to carry around more and learn how to use. But once I did learn it a little bit better, I came to absolutely love it. It's just not the 35. And when you want a lens that doesn't take as much practice and does produce a pretty straightforward image right out of the gate, to me, there's really no beating it. Again, hope you find this video helpful. I tried to include as many shots as I could over the last few years in different scenarios and scenes, so you had a real idea of how you may use it in your own case. If you've got any questions or just want to have a discussion in the comments, because that's probably my favorite part about meeting people on YouTube, holler at your boy, and until the next video, happy shooting.